Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Peggy.
Hey, Jaime, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Oh my gosh, Peggy. So let's just break this real quick.
Yes.
I witnessed this amazing event on Friday night in my hometown. Okay.
Really?
Have you ever experienced an electrical storm? But then on top of that, something I can only describe as a cyclone of electricity in the sky.
I lived in Mississippi for a long time, and yes, I have
You
experienced that.
This was my first time. I've
It's
never seen
amazing.
it. Yeah, it blew my mind, Peggy. I was like, what am I looking at? And
Yeah.
I really thought like a tornado was going to come down of lightning, though. I have never seen this, guys.
So for me, now I experienced this a long time ago.
Huh?
Um, oh God, I don't want to date myself, but my kids were still real young. And just for anybody's knowledge, my oldest is 39. She just turned 39 yesterday. So
Okay.
um, there was a storm coming in. I could see the storm. Now, we lived in Biloxi, Mississippi. So we lived on the Air Force Base there.
Okay.
We weren't that far from the water. We got a lot of hurricanes there and some
Ooh,
tornado activity and water spouts and all that. But we had this
oh my
really
gosh.
weird storm come in. There was tons of lightning around us. And I'm like, you know what? I better go roll up the windows in the van. So my kids came with me. We walked out the front door to the street. I was inside the van. I'm rolling up the windows. This is when you didn't have push buttons,
Power.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm rolling up the windows and lightning struck. So right across the street from the house I lived in on base was our base exchange. So, the shopping center. It blew it hit the transformer.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
And the static electricity, my hair went like this, my arms went like this. And I'm like, oh my God, my kids and I, we're in the van. We're staying here.
Oh my
Grounded.
gosh. That would have freaked
I
me
had
out.
I had to wait until the lightning had passed. My kids were scared, like massively scared.
Yeah.
I grabbed, one of them was too big for me to, pick up. I just said, run, get into the house, grab the baby up. And I said, let's go. I ran her into the house and we had this, I can't remember what they're called, but it's like you get this sudden hurricane force winds that come in and it swept through the entire backyard of our
Like
house.
a gale?
Yes, it was 60-mile-an-hour winds, and it literally lifted every single shed off their slabs and tipped sheds over. So yes, I've been in some very strange weather.
That sounds intense, though, Peggy. Ooh.
It was intense, and it was like really. And there was no time to observe how cool things were. It was just, oh my God.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Oh man, that would have freaked me out too. I've driven by a lightning strike, but nothing like that. Nothing like that. And lightning strikes are no joke. So
I worked in base operations, so I ran the airfield, and I worked right next door to the weather observer. And when I went into work, like the next day or whatever, I said, so who predicted that? And you're like, yeah, nobody.
Right. Last year I learned a funny thing about weather. I'm going to finish this one off, but
right. And then we'll get started on
And everyone, thanks for coming in tonight. Appreciate you all stopping in for us. But okay, I learned, and this is valuable, I think. Okay. I learned every time you see on the news when it says like there's an 18% chance, a 30% chance, or an 80% chance of rain, I always thought that meant exactly what it says, that there's out of 100%, there's an 18% chance that rain's going to fall on us. So take an umbrella or not, right? And I was like, man, but every time they always say the lower the number, I feel like there's always rain.
Especially right now.
I learned last year that means that there is a 100% chance of rain on 18% of the area.
Yeah.
Yeah, or 30% of the area. So every time you hear whatever percentage of rain there is, there's a 100% chance of rain, but only over a certain amount of area. Who knew?
Yeah. We actually watched a storm cell the other day. My husband likes to look at live radar. So he was watching one storm cell and he goes, well, I guess we're the 18% or the 15% of where they were predicting rain.
Yeah. That's so crazy. So if you're watching and you just learned that, like, take that for you and impress all your friends out at the parties and everything else. So
The one job where you can forecast and predict and not get fired.
get fired. Yeah, yeah. Good for those guys. Everyone, thanks for coming again tonight to CyberGangsters Cybersecurity. I am joined by the awesome, talented Peggy Nolan.
Hi.
She is the CEO of Payment Card Assessments. Payment Card Assessments, and you can find that so I found her on LinkedIn. She has a website. We'll post that later on in the comments so you guys can go check it out. But she has been helping us understand more and more about PCI. And so if you're here tonight, you're wanting to learn about PCI, and specifically we're going to be talking about scope. Now, last week we talked about the 6 steps. The 5 mistakes organizations don't know that they're making when it comes to scope. Yeah. And so I'm going to have Peggy go over those real quick and then tell us what we're going to be talking about tonight. But before that, she has a special message she wants to share.
I do.
Peggy, I'm going to actually give you the screen so that everyone pays attention to you. There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. So this is the end of the month. It's the end of September or October. My brain is in October. I love Halloween. It's the end of August. And it's not like a normal end of August. September 1st starts on Friday. So there's a lot of work that goes into getting a report on the compliance across the finish line. I have discovered that trying to get a report on compliance signed, sealed, and delivered to your acquirer before a long weekend or a major holiday is so stressful. So if anybody is doing that right now and you're chasing down your CIO or your CISO, or maybe it's the CFO that's signing off on your report on compliance, or maybe you're tracking down the managing director of your QSA firm, because there needs to be a lot of things that get signed by very important people for your report on compliance to be delivered to your acquirer. And that means if you are doing this right now, you don't get to start your long weekend until they have signed everything that they need to sign and you have submitted it to the acquiring bank along with your last quarter's ASV scans. So for anybody that's doing that right now, I see you. I see you and I know how stressful it is. So I just want you to know you are seen, you are heard. And next time, just remember when you're planning your report on compliance, not to have the end date but into a long weekend or a major holiday.
All right, then. Thank you for that, Peggy. So
You're welcome.
I hope that many of you are encouraged out there. I appreciate Peggy always just being so sweet and kind and being helpful like that. So with that said, good luck to you all.
I get the bruises to show trying to do this over.
You got your battle scars. That's what you got, Peggy, right?
So I'm like, don't do that again.
Good luck, everyone out there. All right. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about, we're still going to be talking about scope. And if you remember last week, we talked about the 5 mistakes organizations don't know that they're making. You guys picked that that's what you wanted to hear about, and that this week we would go over the next topic. But before we get to the next topic, Peggy, remind us what those 5 mistakes that organizations make when dealing with scope.
Absolutely. The first one is, first and foremost, most organizations don't even know the full definition of scope. They think they just have their assets, their servers, their laptops, or whatever, the hardware piece that's in scope, and they're missing chunks of the definition of scope. So that is the first biggest mistake that organizations don't even know they're making, is they don't understand the definition of scope. And a lot of the other reasons sort of piggyback off not knowing the full definition. And one of that is overlooking people and processes. So that's the second big mistake that organizations don't know they're making, is they don't realize that they have to account for people and processes that are in scope, that are in the cardholder data environment or connected to. The third big mistake is they don't follow the money. So when you're doing a scope assessment, you have to make sure you're following the money, and you need to keep following the money because you need to know everything that it is directly going through, who's touching it, who has access to it, and then all of the things that are connected to the money trail. And by money, I mean the credit card transaction. That is money going digitally across networks.
Or biologically, as we talked about the call center issue that you ran into.
Yes.
So go back and watch last week to get the fill on that. I'm sorry.
The fourth big mistake also has to deal with scope, which is accountability and responsibility, or accountability and ownership, right? I remember when I first started in as an ISA, and I would say, well, who owns the control for the configuration standards? And I would get this look on people's faces. They'd go, oh, not me, it's that person, or it's that person. I'd get the scarecrow effect. Mm-hmm. And that used to irritate the heck out of me, because it's like, look, somebody needs to be accountable, and there has to be an owner. Who else are you going to assign tickets to get evidence? Who is responsible for escalation? All of that kinds of things. And it really still to this day blows my mind that the council had to come out with a very specific requirement for each requirement area for accountability and ownership. Come on, companies, we can do better than this. We don't need that as a babysitter requirement. Crazy. People, all right? This is like my soapbox, and I could talk about this all day long.
I understand it. I got my own thing, so I get it. I get it. When you get triggered, you're like, I'm triggered. So
yeah. Sorry.
It's okay.
If you're the firewall system administrator, you're probably the responsible person.
Right.
Then the fifth biggest mistake is manually tracking hardware and software, meaning you're keeping your stuff that's in scope on spreadsheets. I am a lover of spreadsheets. I think they're great. We've been using them since Microsoft came out with Excel, right? Yes. So, and I'm also a list maker. However, I know that manually tracking your assets, especially when you have hundreds, if not thousands of assets that are in scope, is next to impossible. People think that, oh, I have it on 7 spreadsheets and I've got the rest of it in my head, I can track it. No, you can't. No, you can't. Because guess what? The person who has to scan your assets needs that asset inventory, and they're not going to go digging for it in your head. All right. It needs to be automated. And we're going to get into that with part of our 6 steps into easily managing your scope.
Awesome. That was a mouthful, Peggy. I appreciate you bringing us through all that. And like I said, you guys, you can watch last week's video on YouTube. It's also on my LinkedIn, and you can listen in detail what each of these were that Peggy expanded on. So feel free to go check out there, throw some questions if you have. And tonight, as we go along, feel free to throw questions in the chat too, so that Peggy or I can answer for you and educate you and help you through your scoping, okay? So Peggy, what did we want to talk about tonight? What did everyone vote to say that they wanted to talk about tonight?
So we're going to go over the 6 simple steps to managing scope. So that was a decided yes, that we were going to tackle that as part 2. Now, I call it 6 simple steps, not 6 easy steps, but they are simple. All right. They are simple. Some are easier than others. But a journey of 1,000 steps begins with the first step. Right? A journey of 1,000 miles. You got to take that first step. Yep. And so one of the first things that you want to do, and I always put this as the first step, is when you look at your cardholder data environment, how can you descope? Where do you have vendors that provide services? Do you have a payment page provider? Are you using a technology in your call centers like DTMF, which is dual tone multi-frequency? They have a way to scramble the number and the credit card number and make it a flat dial tone. Very complicated, and that could be expensive, but it is a way to descope your call centers if you have call center activities. Mm-hmm. And often when you reduce scope, you're going to save time, money, and effort. But just know that when you reduce your scope, you're also picking up more vendors, which means 12.8 and its sub-requirements for tracking your vendors becomes more important now that you have, I hate using this term, you've left shifted responsibility.
Yeah.
But you have signed contractual agreements for a service provider to come in and do something for you. So here are some solid examples of how you can reduce scope. Now,
Okay.
remember last week we talked about a flat network. Well, if you have a flat network and you have one system that's processing payments or doing anything in the transmit, process, store, your whole network is in scope, right? So proper network segmentation so that the cardholder data environment is completely isolated from the rest of the network, meaning you're treating your corporate network like an untrusted network. That is a great way to reduce the scope of your assessment, because remember, if you've got a flat network, everything's in scope, and who wants to do that? Not me.
Right.
Not me. Not in a
Right.
million years.
And so for those of you watching, just, like if flat network is a new term for you or anything like that, just remember it's kind of like imagine your home. When you're in home and you haven't really you've never touched it, like the internet provider comes in, they install their service in your home, and then you just start going on the internet, playing your video games, Netflixing it up, all that stuff. Essentially your home is like a flat network. That's what you can think about it like. And then, if you're here, hopefully you've started to scratch the surface of scope and understanding what the cardholder data environment and how securing that and segmenting it away, how that helps. We're talking about reducing the cost to an organization. That's one of the ways you do it, is so that only the cardholder data information is within this specific virtual room, and all that data is just there, so that everything else outside of there, it's not going to get touched. Go ahead, thanks.
Good explanation.
Thank you.
All right. Another way to descope is by using a third-party hosted payment page. I came from an environment where we had our own pages, we had our own iframe, and I was like, guys, come on, we can get our acquirer can do this for us. But no, they wanted to
Own it.
Own it. They wanted to own it. And there's going to be reasons why corporations and organizations don't want to descope, because they want to own it. I'm okay with that, as long as they know that their costs are going to go up for assessments. Their costs will go up for securing the cardholder data environment. So there is, give and take on what you want to do, but having a third-party hosted payment page is a great example of reducing scope.
Let me ask you about that real quick, because I get the concept, right? It makes sense to me. I want to own my own products, right? I can control, I can ensure that security is in place, or that routing is taken care of, all that stuff. I get that piece, right? What was how, in your experience, did you find that people or organizations were tough on offsetting that, or how did you call it just a moment ago? Left shifting,
yeah, responsibility.
Did you find that it was challenging to get organizations to left shift the responsibility of, in this case, like owning their products to a third service, a vendor, basically?
It's hard when you have an organization that is committed to the customer experience, meaning they're already having issues with customer experience and they don't want to rock the boat. This could rock the boat, right? And it has there's that fear of, if we're using somebody else to process that payment, even though it's seamless and you're not even redirected to another website, iframes can be embedded, and it's somebody else's iframe that will take a lot out of scope for you. However, there's just, I don't know. I think smaller organizations get it, right? They get it. When I'm not doing PCI, I'm also, I make things. And I do craft fairs, and I have Square, and
this is the inside scoop, guys. I didn't even know this.
Scoop, so I use a third party. I don't have to worry about it.
Right. That makes sense. I know. So when you were talking like that, it made me think of the times in the past that I've experienced using a vendor, and when things happen, usually it happens is the ticket influx comes in, right? We're getting these alerts that, hey, why are, you get 1 or 2, 3 kind of issues in the same ticket, depending on the organization size. You're kind of like, that's fine. But then you start seeing that flood, and those flags go off in the alerts. You're like, wait a minute, we just got how many tickets? What's going on? And across how much of the country? And then you're like, oh my geez. you know something's going on. And so I get that the challenge is like, and I've been in that situation where I've had to call the vendor and be like, hey, we are seeing an influx, something's broken. And as you know, as the time goes on, you're like, okay, we've honed it down to your payment, the payment processor or the iframe or whatever, what's going on. And so I don't like the feeling of being in the dark and being like, I've got a team on it, everyone, stop calling, you know what I mean? And so it's like, but you don't know. And so you're reliant on that vendor and you're like, man, and I've been where there's some vendors who just don't let you in until it's like, until it's fixed. And you're like, this was hours long. How come you couldn't communicate? Yeah. I mean,
so there is definitely, there's reasons to do it. There's reasons not to do it. There's reasons to own it. And there's reasons to left shift. Hey, Janaea. One of the ways that my former company reduced scope, and they thought they were going to reduce scope like by 90%. They simply stopped storing credit card data. Once upon a time, they did their own tokenization.
Okay.
All right. And then in 2015, when PCI went from version 2 to version 3, the application team said, hey, Acquirer is doing this for us, and we can stop storing the data. They'll do our tokenization. We transmit, they tokenize it, and send us back a customer reference number. Easy peasy, great way to descope it. You're not going to descope 90%. You're going to descope all but 4 or 5 requirements in requirement 3. And then there's a handful in requirement 9 where it says, if you store credit card data, do X, Y, and Z, right? And those become not applicable. There's a couple in requirement 8. So I would say that you get to reduce your scope mostly in requirement 3, which is an absolute headache if you're doing your own tokenization because you have to do all the cryptographic stuff. All right.
See, so
that's
that
not
helps
my favorite area of security. And I know some people eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Thank you for doing that. To me, that feels like accounting.
Yeah.
I don't want to do accounting ever. I have great friends that are accountants, and I have great friends who love doing cryptography stuff. So yay.
And I think that's a good point. So for those of you out there who are coming in and you're looking at it, and I ran across someone who gave me a question this week, and they were like, I don't remember exactly how they said it, but it was essentially like, are all requirements always used? And I was like, your question's kind of weird. If you can give me some more context. They didn't, but I was thinking, like what you're talking right now, there are scenarios that exist where it's not that all requirements don't apply. It's that sometimes some of them are not applicable to the organization's credit card health, or however you want to look at that. Right.
And when you look at the reporting template, there are, the QSA will mark it either as in place, not in place. They were going to release it with in place with remediation. They axed that pretty quickly. Or not applicable.
So when you see that, that's kind of that's the caveat to some of the requirements, isn't it?
And then you have to prove the negative so that you can prove that it's not applicable. So if you have, as an organization, have stopped storing credit card data, you're going to have to jump through some rings of fire to prove to the QSA that you don't store credit card data.
And that is just another reason, like the common denominator when we come on and talk about all this, is why as an organization you need a PCI professional in your organization to help you navigate that stuff, because it's easy for someone in the C-suite or somewhere anywhere to just be like, oh, if we just cut it out, we're good. But then you come rock time and it's like, oh my gosh, we just, and Peggy, you've shared about how you've had to cut off a rock from being completed. You weren't going to complete it because you found some information, right?
We had a big problem. So I had to stop the rock. We had a huge problem.
And so you don't want to fall into a situation where you're like that and you've got to go to the powers that be. So organizations, it's okay to spend on finding that PCI professional and getting them to help you out. It saves you in the long run.
Yes. And by the way, I'll be talking about that at the PCI European Community Meeting in October.
I'm going to get the link up
and why you need to have an ISA on staff.
I'm going to get the link up so when we get to that later again, I can share it with all of you. But go ahead, Peggy.
Another way to descope is through, like I said, I talked about DTMF, the dual tone multi-frequency. It's expensive. But again, that's also going to run into customer experience. If you have a call center operations, a lot of large organizations might be a little leery of a DTMF solution, but there's also a virtual PIN pad for call centers, which is really kind of interesting because there's a solution that descopes the call center agents and their laptop device that they're using, because they have a virtual PIN pad that recycles. It's almost like having a I just brain skipped. It's like having a token that recycles every 60 seconds. You'll get a new token up, right? So this virtual dial pad does the same thing. Like you'll key in the first 4 numbers and then it does its little magic. And then you key in the next set of numbers, does its little magic. It will do it every 4 numbers. It's kind of cool. I don't know how expensive it is. And I've only seen it once.
So it's like these. So this is a Google Authenticator app, for example.
But it's different than that.
It's even different than that.
It's way different. It's a virtual PIN pad right on the screen that they touch. It's interesting.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. I learned about it.
But for those who didn't understand too well, like that's as close as the example I can pull out real quick.
Yeah,
the code changing.
It always changes, and the virtual PIN pad, it's like a rotary phone. Oh my God, it's like a rotary phone. Okay, enough said.
Okay.
So now most of you have gone to the grocery store, the gas station, your fun retail outlet, where point-to-point encryption is used for card-present transactions. So that when they use a point-to-point encryption thing, that you'll see it at restaurants, they'll come to your table with it. Mm-hmm. That keeps their network out of scope, because it's point-to-point encryption.
So that means it's not on their network. Like it might use like a cellular connection.
No? It's encrypted.
Okay.
It's an encrypted transmission all the way through. But the thing, the thing about those, which I think obviously for retail outlets, it makes the most sense, but they have to keep stock of it. They have to check their inventory. They have to make sure there's a whole bunch of requirements in requirement 9 for point of interaction devices. Mm-hmm. These are the point-to-point encryption devices. So you have to make sure that you're always checking them. You're checking them for skimmers, and there's all kinds of things that you have to do, but it keeps your network out of scope. So it's a no-brainer.
Peggy, we're talking about point of encryption devices and all this. Let me ask. Someone asked a question to me earlier this week about something called SCRs and why they were not.
What's an SCR? I've never heard of it.
Secure card reader. A secure card reader not being applicable in SAC-B IP.
You're going to have to send me the question offline.
Okay, we'll talk about it offline, and then if that person's watching, maybe next week we can address it and do a little bit more. But no worries.
Yeah,
it was pretty detailed, and I was like, "Say what?" So
yeah,
that's okay.
I know a lot about point-to-point encryption, but not. We didn't have that at my former company. We were e-commerce and call center ops, so we didn't have point-to-point encryption. But I do know. So there's different SAQs, and each SAQ has a certain criteria that you have to meet in order to fill out that SAQ.
Yes.
So we can talk about that offline.
Sounds good.
All right. So those are just some of the examples of how you can reduce scope. And again, as always look, if, once you have reduce the scope of your cardholder data environment to the point where your organization is happy with it, meaning you're not going to do any more. You've done what you can, right? You've optimized it that way. Then we are going, before I mention anything else about where we're going to go next, is when you are reducing your scope, you have to remember that your vendors are in scope for requirement 12.8 and all the sub requirements. So you have to be collecting things like the master services agreement. That's where it's going to have a statement in there about that your vendor understands their roles and responsibilities, maintaining PCI compliance. All right. The vendor has to provide you with a roles and responsibility matrix. Now, the best example I can give you, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, AWS has a great roles and responsibility matrix. You have to be a customer of AWS to be able to download it and get it. I am a customer of AWS, but I'm not allowed to share it. I'm just telling you, they have the best roles and responsibility matrix. And I have a feeling it's because it was written and created by their QSA firm. It is the best. I'm going to try to do something where I put up a mock roles and responsibilities matrix. But you have to collect that from your service provider. And service providers are required by 12.9 to give it to you.
So that makes sense. And I've seen one of these, I think. These are like where it has the requirements, and then up top it shows the organization and the vendor. In this example, AWS.
And it says, is this the vendor, who's responsible? And it'll have vendor.
If it's shared. So they'll have vendor, organization, and shared, right?
Right.
And then they just check mark them. So you go through all of that, and that's what it is. So for those of you who haven't seen those, that's what it looks like. I've seen them out there before, and sometimes you can catch them if you just do a Google search.
Yeah.
Somewhere, you can do a responsibility matrix PCI Google search and see if something comes up. I know I've seen one or two. So
yeah. I'll never forget having to talk a vendor through what they had to provide. And they're like, oh, no, we don't. And I said, oh, yeah. Yes, you do. You either do it or, I don't know.
And I'm going to hate to ring this bell again. Why the importance of having a PCI professional on staff helps with that, because if you didn't and they told you that, you would be like, oh, well, I thought you go back and forth. But when you have that professional, when you have someone who's like Peggy, they can be in there, be like, no, we need that. You need to give it to us.
Yeah,
according to the requirement 12.8, 12.9.
I even tried to give them examples and they still wouldn't follow my examples. And I said,
in the end, when they fell.
And then I went back to the team that wanted this vendor and I said, look, either you get a new account rep or you're not signing the contract, because they're just not listening. Yeah.
So just another selling point for you organizations, or for you who are looking to get into that. That's a selling point you can bring. These are the type of conversations. Listen to these things, because there's little nuggets within the teachings that Peggy brings and everyone else who comes on here, where it's like, if you know that piece of information, that can help you leverage the PCI professional on staff, right? And so when you know those things, when you're like, have you talked to them? I can make that conversation with them, and I can force it, and I can show them where the requirement is, and you can be the subject matter expert that you need to be, that the organizations need. So just anyway.
Yep. And just a few more points about your vendors. They also have to provide you with their attestation of compliance. And some vendors will sit here and, if you're a level 2 service provider, you can do a SAC-D. However, I got to the point of dealing with a couple of service providers that I said, I don't care if you can do a SAC-D or not. I want a QSA to do whatever it is you have to do for compliance, because I don't want you signing off on this. I want a QSA.
Way to be forceful.
I got pretty tough with a couple of vendors because I thought they were a little shady.
And it calls for that though. Sometimes when I would expect a vendor to know what they need to know. Yeah. But when they come out with some stuff like that, you're kind of like, huh?
Or when you find out that they were breached.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I said, no.
So when contract renewal comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what other thing do you want to get from your service? You have to dot your I's and cross your T's with your service providers who are taking on that PCI responsibility. You also have to make sure that if something happens, you've got a use case in your incident response plan. Because even if you have a service provider that's doing, say you outsource your call center, or you have a hosted payment page or whatever, and there was a breach, they're still your customers. So you have to have a use case in your incident response plan.
Makes sense.
Yes. All right. So now let's get into step 2. Step 2, we're going into like my favorite area of following the money, because we all love money.
Yes.
I love money. All right. So when you're following the money, and I've outlined this in this How to Manage Scope Without Losing Your Mind course. When you're first doing this, you're going to schedule a big meeting with your application developers, your security architects, somebody from finance, right? Because obviously they own the money. Or they're responsible for the money traveling through their systems. You need to do a walkthrough of all the cardholder data flows. So you have to have a cardholder data flow for every way that you take a credit card payment. So when you think about the fact that I came from an organization that had e-commerce and call centers, we had 9 cardholder data flows. Okay. We still had a lot of cardholder data flows because there were different ways that a customer could make a payment, whether it was directly online, through an IVR system, through the call center activity, and you multiply that by another 1 or 2 applications, and you have 9 cardholder data flows. All right.
So make sure you understand that, folks. It's like you may have one business, but that one business can accept payments multiple different ways. Depending on those different ways, you might have 2 locations that accept credit cards in one particular way. That's still just one payment channel. But if they accept in different ways, phone calls, credit cards in person, credit cards not in person, those are all going to be different payment streams. And so that's what Peggy's talking about right now. So
yeah. And just think about how fast digital transactions are moving, right? And the way that card brands are trying to make it even more frictionless for customers to make payments using their cards. You may have a way on your phone to make a payment. So there's all different kinds of types of payment channels. So just be aware of what they are. And you have to review all of those diagrams, and you need to have one for every single cardholder data flow.
Yes.
That you have.
You may not be the ones creating it because, Peggy, I have a hard time sometimes thinking auditors are creating these diagrams. And I'm like, no. That's what the network security team or the network administration is for. Yeah. They're the ones who know that data flow intimately, daily. They're the ones who should be creating that. We should be making a request for that. They should be providing it for us. And if they don't know, oh, geez.
So so this is the first step, right? Or the second step is you're having this meeting with everybody and they're walking you through the card. They're showing you got a big screen going on and you're walking through the flow. This is how the transaction happens. From soup to nuts, from when the customer gives you the number to when it clears.
Yes.
They're walking you through the whole thing. And by the way, inside this meeting, you want your QSA there. Okay. Because what you're doing is you're also satisfying requirements at the same time.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right? So now you're feeding 2 birds from one hand.
Right. You're getting your QSA, the requirements that they can complete from that meeting. You're also ensuring that the organization has the required documentation that the requirements also require.
Right. And not to mention, during this walkthrough, it's an interview. It's an observation. You get your document. You get it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start a report on compliance, you're starting in the green. This should already be marked in place. And it gives the QSA an opportunity to ask questions, clarify things. They can validate and verify that, yes, this is the direct path of what's in scope. So this is your primary systems that store, process, and transmit. These are your primary processes and your primary people. Because remember, people, process, technology.
Right.
Right.
So for those of you in the learning scope, you're listening to this and you're learning about this. Yes, you like Peggy just dropped so many different nuggets just now. Like to understand how the job is, right? There's so many aspects to it, but there are pieces where you have to rely on the people that have the information. I know I get a lot of questions. They're like, I don't know how to code something. I don't know how to work or operate a network switch, or I don't know how to,
You don't
all
need
these other
to.
things. It's like, you don't need that.
You don't need to.
Organizations have their experts. You as the PCI professional, though, as a subject matter expert, you do have to know what you need, and the organization has to provide that need, right? Like you don't need to know how to open ports on a network,
Nope.
but you need to know that, okay, that's a networking item. Who runs the networking department? This is what I need. And then they should be able to say, here's our manager, here's our professional on this side. They'll get you anything you need that's related to the network.
Yep. And when we're doing this, you have everybody in the same room doing this walkthrough. You're not sending out a million tasks. You're doing it all in one big meeting.
So just wanted to say that out loud for folks who want to hear that. Like I said, a lot of people feel like, oh my gosh. And then they feel like they need to go get more certifications and training on technology and I'm like, just spend 5 minutes on YouTube or Google real quick to figure out what a oh my gosh, a firewall is real quick. You do not need to know the details. Just spend the 5 minutes to see what it is and get an example and be like, okay, move on. Go to the other learning stuff. There's so much more.
The most important thing to know about a firewall is any rules are bad.
Yes, that is the main thing. Corey's here, says, great point, Jaime. You betcha, Corey.
All right. But I want to make something very clear. You have to be technical enough. You cannot come into PCI not knowing anything about IT security. That's a lie. You have to know enough. I had to know enough in the firewall space that in any rule was bad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that wouldn't pass anything. Okay.
Okay.
I have to know enough in cryptography to know what strong cryptography is.
Right.
Okay. Have to know enough. I need to know enough about strong access controls that permeates the entire DSS. You're going to see it time and time again, not just in requirement 7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I had to know enough about Active Directory, so that I can look at the Active Directory security policy and go, as long as I have this, I'm golden on all my Windows servers because this is being pushed down to all of them.
Right, right. There's so much validity to what you're saying, Peggy, and I completely agree with you. I don't want to make it seem like if it sounded like that's what I was saying, that was not.
No, what I want to caution people is you have to know enough. Do you need another certification? No. Mm-hmm. Do you need a Comp T plus whatever?
Yeah.
You don't need that. You don't need it.
Yeah.
Not for PCI. But to be an ISA, you need to know enough to sit down and do that training and then take the exam and pass the exam. You need to know enough.
So I have a Discord, Peggy, where I have some fellow learners and stuff like that. And so if you're in the Discord, sometimes I do post webinars to like intro to computer, just kind of, basic understanding of those things, intro to networking. I post those in there because those will help edify you in that base knowledge that you are going to want when entering.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely. Like you need to be able to read a diagram and understand what's going on in the diagram.
Yeah.
In a network diagram, right? You need to know enough. You need to be able to follow the lines and make sure no magic processes are happening, meaning you've got lines coming from one box going nowhere, or a line that starts out of thin air and drops into something, and I call those black holes. So you have to know how to read a diagram and follow along with the money, because that's going to help you go, that's in scope, they're in scope, those 5 processes are in scope, right? That's why you're going to have this massively long meeting, and it could be several meetings depending on how many cardholder data flows you have. We had 9. It took all day to get through it.
I'm surprised it was one day, even, because some of the organizations I've been a part of, it'd be like, yeah, we're gonna have to schedule another day or two.
It got to one day because they got it right year after year, and so it got down to one day to go through each of the cardholder flows and identify the primary systems, the primary people, the primary processes, right? Because then you have to make sure that you have all the documentation. So if this is the first pass, it could take you longer than a day. This whole thing for this first section of following the money of just what stores, processes, and transmit, we're not even talking about connected to yet. Okay. It could take a month, because once you have this solid, you have to document everything. Everything needs to be documented. And what I found is when we first started doing it this way, I would say, oh, well, we've got our processes in a wiki. We've got our processes in that PDF. We've got our processes in that Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, okay, guys, you're all on the same team. Get it in one place. Don't care. Just get it in one place.
Right.
All right. So if this is a first pass at a scope assessment, you need to plan accordingly. I would say give yourself a month to do just this. I got it down to, I would do my end-to-end scope assessment in 1 month because we had done this a number of times. And so we were very familiar with our cardholder data flows. And if there were changes, they would come up in this meeting. But it came down to, I would give myself a month to do end-to-end scope assessment. 4 weeks before I
kicked off. Everyone, it's good when you're going through PCI learning, it's good to get it. It's not a cookie cutter situation, but it's good to hear what people experience time expectation, so that you just start understanding the time frame. Because a lot of times people are like, does it take a year to do assessment? Does it take 6 months? Does it take 2 months? And what I'm finding is it all depends. It's random. It depends on the organization. And even if there's a set amount of time, like let's just say that this organization has 4 months, just throwing it out there, there's still time that needs to be tacked on at the end of that the QSA has to assess for their Q&A, and then come back to you so that you can reevaluate it to make sure it's on point, and then it's good to go. And so sometimes that Q&A period can be different too, but also add on to your original, whatever time frame you were looking at. So
so I didn't even count my scope assessment as part of a report on compliance activity. It was pre-work that had to be done before I kicked off. Because there's something I need from the QSA out of this. And once we have everybody's agreed that this is our asset inventory, this is the process inventory, this is the physical location inventory, they have to go and pull a sample. If you're sampling. Now, we got to the point where a lot of things we said, no, we're not sampling. We're not sampling for requirement 5 because it's on every single system in our organization across the board.
So was that something that was, when you figured that part out, Peggy, was that because you also did like that was part of your pre-work? You're like, we verified, so there's no reason for sampling. It wasn't
there's no reason. Yeah, there's no reason to sample.
Oh, I'm just not going to do sampling. No, it's because you verified it prior.
I verified it prior. So just so you know, sampling is a way to do an assessment without assessing everything. Okay.
And so like everyone, you might have an organization that had, let's just say there's 100 computers as an example, right? Sampling, you might say, well, we're only going to check 10% of those computers. 10 computers.
They all have to be the same though.
Yes.
Same OS, same level, same machine, whatever. They all have to be the same.
And so that's how sampling works out. So you take that concept, like with those 100 computers, and you think the network switches, you think the phone tree or the phone, the IP phones, you take all that, any of that components that interact with the credit card holder data, that's where you would apply sampling to, if you needed to.
Right.
Peggy's
so the reason why we didn't sample for anti-malware was because, one, it was across the board on every single system, not just on cardholder data systems, right? So to try to sample off of an entire population and zero it down to system like call center agents, right? To zero it down on them, that was going to take more time than just saying, here is the report out of the management console. Have a nice day. There's your proof.
Yes.
And we did the same thing for, this was the old version. So version 3.2.1 for requirement 10.3, which said every log event has to have, a date timestamp, the originator, where it came from, whatever. It had, it's got like 7 criteria that
pretty
needs
detailed.
to be. Yeah, it's a pretty detailed that comes out of what needs to be in the log for the log event. I just said, you know what, I'm not pulling this for every single log. I'm going to just write my query in Splunk and I'm going to pull it on everything that's in the cardholder data environment so they can see. See, we've got everything you need to see in our logs. Here you go. Didn't need to sample. And to be honest with you, the problem you get into with sampling is if you sample, say we have 100 Windows servers and we're going to sample. There's a methodology for sampling in PCI, but we're going to take 30 of those servers because that's what it would probably be like if there's 100. And I'm going to start assessing those 30 for configuration management or whatever. The first 3 are fine. They're great. But the next 6 are failing. They're going to say, hey, these 6 are failing. Can you pull another 6? Or they'll say, can you pull 10 more?
Yeah. And
it's not a 1-for-1 match. And then if you have more failures, they're going to say, no, we need to assess all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Important. It's a saver if you can do it in the pre-work so that way you're not spending the QSA dollars or, remember, an organization only has a limited amount of funds that they've devoted to their compliancy, to the PCI compliancy.
Yeah.
You don't want to waste them all. I've heard stories about all the budget went into
blow the budget on PCI compliance.
Yeah. So anyhow.
So the other thing about sampling, where was I going to go with sampling? I'll come back to it.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. All right. So once you've documented all of your primary systems and you've got all of the documentation, you've got your cardholder flow diagrams, and you've got, all of the billing processes. And when I talked about your financial processes, it's billing. How do you, what's the process for a one-time payment? What's the process for a recurring payment? Cancellation. How do you do fraud? What do you do with overdue payments? You have a collections department, an in-house collections department. They're in scope because they are directly handling credit card data. So you have to really ask great questions. And the most important character trait at this point that an ISA or whoever's running the compliance program internally is to be curious, right? Because your QSA, if you land a really good one, they're going to be very curious too, and they will ask great questions. There was one particular QSA I worked with for 8 or 9 years. He was great. I used to refer to him as my Winnie the Pooh because he asked great questions and he was always curious. He was just curious. He would just say, can you tell me more about that process? Simple question. And it's non-confrontational. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about your technology? What does it do? Can you show me?
I had an old colleague, and it was funny that you mentioned that because she used to tell me, she was like, we talked about how to manage stress and how to handle difficult people, right? And I was like, man, this person really irked me. And, she was like, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but, you did come kind of strong and stuff. And I was like, well, I was upset with him. I was upset at his remarks. And she was like, can I just share, when I have someone like that I'm dealing with, I usually say, can you explain that to me a little bit better or a little bit more? And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I like that. She used it on me the following week, and I was like, oh, that's what it feels like. So
Right.
I was like, okay.
So there was a presentation that I did a long time ago. Like I think I started with this one in 2015 or 2016, and I took the 5 main Winnie the Pooh characters, and they all have a character trait. And I used to work with an EOR, so the EOR I worked with would always tell me why something couldn't work. And I can remember being in a meeting with him and just going through, and this is before I even worked in PCI, and he was just going through all the reasons why we couldn't do something.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him and I said, so can you tell me what you can do?
Nice one. Nice.
Tell me what you can do, because I don't want to hear what you can't do anymore.
Yeah. It's a drum that you're kind of like, yeah, I'm just done with that one, please.
Yeah, I'm done with that. All right. So I think I hammered home step number 2.
Okay.
So step number 3 is pretty much the same. So if this is brand new to you and your organization has never done a scope assessment, you're going to need to allot appropriate time for this. Now, I got to the point where I could, like I said, I could do everything soup to nuts in these 6 steps in about 30 days. I could do it in a month, or I guess that's 20 days. So step number 3 is you have to keep following the money. This is where all the connected to systems come into play. And remember last week, we went through the diagram of what's in scope. So you have to go through everything that's connected to the things that provide network segmentation, the things that provide security. And if for any reason something's connected to it, it's in scope. It doesn't matter if it's connected to, right? So you have to make sure you've got everything, and you might be talking to some of the same people, because now you're going to be looking at your network diagrams, because you have to marry them to the cardholder data environments. When I got really good at this, I was also including network diagrams with cardholder flow diagrams, because we would be looking at the network diagram to make sure that we had all of the representations of the different ways that we accepted payments were represented inside the network diagram. Okay, because that's what you need to show in the overall network diagram that gets included in the executive summary is all the, you just have like, so we had a call center, right? So we had 13 call centers, but we only had 1 representation on the diagram of a call center.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I'm following.
We had, 1 representation of a person with a headset on. We had a little tower for IVR, and we had 3 of them, I think. So
it was only 1 diagram with all those representations on it, not 9 separate diagrams?
No.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Because if you look at the executive summary, they're looking for a high-level network diagram, and this is the same diagram. And you can go into a deeper dive if your QSA really wants you to, but you don't need to. But this network diagram is representation of everything. It's got your firewalls, it's got your switches, it's got your in-house tokenization, it's got your data powers, your HSMs, your representation of inside the cardholder data environment of what your payment application is sitting on. What server is it? If you've got databases in there, there's representation of that. It's got to show the DMZ. It's got to show the connectivity out to the acquiring bank and wherever else that transmission is going.
Yes.
All right. So there are things that need to be included in the diagram, because you'll look at requirement 1 and it says, you need to have they don't use the terminology DMZ anymore, I don't think, in requirement 4.0. I think they just have termed it untrusted networks. But you're still but inside that DMZ is where you're gonna have that connection point, that little hop between the bad
internet
world
and
your
the
internal
cardholder
network.
data.
Right. So this,
and
again,
that's a common practice that is in the network realm. So the use of the DMZ is, we as non-network administrators, we know that there needs to be firewalls in place of the outside world and our environment. How that is accomplished, the network admin team should know that. Traditionally, that's always been a DMZ, but if requirement or if 4.0 is not referencing DMZ anymore,
I am gonna do my double checking, but I just recently did the overview for requirement 1 in our resource center.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're really moving towards trusted and untrusted networks. And a DMZ is an untrusted network.
Yes. But
your corporate network is an untrusted network.
Yeah. Right. But those would be the network admins.
That's their job.
Yeah. Responsibility, ownership, all that stuff.
Right.
We are just validating that is compliant, but we need to know those questions. We need to know what the network diagram is looking like.
We have to ask the right questions. Yeah. And again, we have to know enough. We have to know that the rest of the world outside of your cardholder data environment is pretty much an untrusted network.
And on a side note, make sure you have your terms with you, learners, because sometimes you might describe DMZ or untrusted site, and the network admin or someone else on whatever topic you're talking about, they may be like, well, what do you declare an untrusted site is?
Right.
If you have the PCI glossary of terms with you.
Right.
You can be like, well, this is what it states. Does it meet that definition or not?
I can remember having conversations with our security architects, and they got to the point where they're just saying, you know what? We're going to treat every network outside of the cardholder data environment as an untrusted network. And I said, that's a good place to be.
That is a great place. Yes.
It's a good place to be, treated as untrusted.
Yeah. I like that.
So when you're doing step 3 and you're doing all of the connected to systems, this could take you longer. This is where you're going to end up with more systems, more people, and more processes. We had 30 in-scope technologies that provided security or segmentation or could impact the cardholder data environment that were in scope for PCI.
And those were pieces that were owned and used by the organization. Yeah. So we're not even talking about.
You have to think about, your logging technology, whatever you're using to log, whatever you're using for vulnerability management, whatever you're using for anti-malware, whatever you're using, your Active Directory system is in scope. Whatever you're doing for access control is in scope. The system that does the badging, if you have that at your organization for physical security, guess what? It's in scope.
Security control. There you go.
Yeah, it's in scope.
Hey, Peggy, there's a large question here that Mehmet brought. Mehmet, if I got your name wrong, my apologies. But it says, hi, Jaime and Peggy. Thanks again for your valuable time and information you are sharing. Would you mind elaborating on how QSA validate the scope after examining network and data flow diagrams? In there, the role of data discovery tools, manually or automated, some examples either open source or proprietary software. A data discovery method, either manual or automated, is to my understanding a requirement for A3.2.5.1, which
that's an appendix?
That's what he says. Designated entity, supplemental validation, but a good practice. It cut him off. So that's a lot. That's a
lot. Mohammed, we can talk offline on that, but by and large, how you validate scope is through this methodology. This is what worked for 10 years for us. It's proven. And nobody stood up and said, no, you can't do that when I presented this presentation at the PCI North American Community Meeting in 2022. The designated entities, oh my goodness. I remember reading something about that, and that was causing a lot of confusion for the masses. So I'm going to look at the FAQs and what's going on with that. But Mohammed, we can talk offline.
I think
the thing about automated tools and having a QSA come in and use an automated tool on your network, would you do that, Jaime? Would you just let them come in and do that? No, me neither. We would not let our QSA firm run anything of theirs on our network.
I would have to, all of you, when you go out, so there's questions that get often asked in LinkedIn, and I appreciate them so much. The cybersecurity community that I'm in, they ask questions about what I'm about to say, and then you also see the reports. For example, what's the big one every year, Peggy? The Verizon,
the Verizon payment security report.
Okay, so even in that, they address every year where the highest breach.
The repeat
maybe?
offenders, the controls that are the most hardest for people to do.
Yeah, and the number one on there is always people. It's people who cause
Problems.
the danger, you know. And
that
there's
came
no
out
way.
in their breach report.
Yeah, there's no way around it. People cause that the most. So asking, or a QSA asking me, or anyone for that matter, asking me to install software on our network, I would also say not only would I be highly against it, but I'd be like, you're gonna have to talk to the.
That's just fraught with danger.
Yes.
I'm robot now. Danger. No.
Yes.
No.
So I think in a high level overview in that, yeah, you with the QSA's piece, if they're wanting some of that, there's got to be some vetting that has to go on, major vetting, and it can't just be automatic. So.
And then their software or whatever they're going to use has to be tested, and you need to do it in a development area and make sure nothing's going to happen. And that development area needs to mimic your cardholder data environment. Not very many people have something that mirrors that.
So one of the things that Mehmet asked that I wonder if you can answer to, Peggy, though, is the first part of here, the first question in there where it said, would you mind elaborating on how QSA validate the scope after examining network and data flow diagrams?
So they're in the meeting with you. They're in the meeting with you. They're asking questions. They're making sure that this is how it operates. They're interviewing directly the application developers, the network security architects, the person responsible for the network diagrams, the finance team. They're there with you, validating your scope.
So I hope that makes sense, everyone. So, you know, when you have a QSA that's going to be signing off on your ROC and or your SAC, they have stuff that they're going to need to go through, right? A QSA has their checklist of things that need to be accomplished, right? Yeah. For your organization as an ISA, you are there you're the liaison between the QSA and
my job is to make it as easy for them as possible.
So you want to provide, as an ISA for an organization, you want to provide as many opportunities for answers to be given at the smallest, fewest amount of interactions necessary, right? Because that QSA costs money. That eats into the validation budget, you know? So as an ISA, that's what you're trying to do. So anyway, he has a follow-up. Mehmet says, the other question is how to differentiate between system component directly connects to CDE, which is defined as connected system in PCI DSS page 11, and system component has unrestricted connectivity to systems that SPT CHD/SAD, which is defined as in scope.
They're both in scope.
Read that a little bit.
So Mohammed, I can't remember if you were on last week's call. We went over the definition of scope pretty extensively. So any system that is connected to the cardholder data environment because it provides network segmentation, could impact the security of, provides security monitoring tools, or for whatever reason is connected to, it's in scope, period. Whether it has unrestricted connectivity or maybe it just connects once a week. Guess what? It connects. It's in scope.
So as long as it touches, Peggy,
if it touches, you're in scope. And furthermore, if you look at the supplemental on scope and segmentation, it says, if it's in the cardholder data environment, irrespective of reason, it's in scope. If it's connected to the cardholder data environment, irrespective of function, use, or why, it's in scope.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Mehmet. Yeah, I feel like that makes sense, Peggy. So, Mehmet, if there's some more clarification, feel free to ask, and we'll put it up there. So, yeah. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. Somebody's doing this homework.
Right. But obviously, I'm going to go look at Mehmet afterwards and be like, "What does his LinkedIn say?" But I'm just curious what he does.
No, he actually does this.
Oh, okay. No, yeah. I was just curious.
And I can't remember if Mohammed, if you're listening, are you brand new? Are you like a brand new ISA?
He did say, I totally agree with what you say about smallest number of interactions with QSA.
Now I need to find out if he's a brand new ISA. I think he is.
Okay. Well, let us know, Mehmet, in the comments, please. It takes a couple of seconds for things to catch up and stuff, so no worries.
So the biggest thing that hit home to me that I communicated out to everybody at my former organization was what was in the guidance document. It doesn't matter if it's in the cardholder data environment, you're in scope. If you're connected to, you're in scope. Nope, doesn't matter. Directly and unrestricted, doesn't matter. I have a feeling two different people, because they have multiple people writing these words, they don't cross-check.
Their editor didn't catch this.
Probably my biggest beef with the Security Council is they'll have multiple people write this. It goes through multiple iterations of RFCs, so requests for comments. And then sometimes what comes out is you can literally tell, oh, we've got 6 different people writing this.
Yeah.
And different sections get assigned to different people on the standards team or something like that. But you can just tell it's not written by just one person. Right.
I feel you.
Otherwise, we would have had synchronization on directly and unrestricted.
Yes. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit, Mehmet. Okay. And if you can remember, Peggy was asking, are you new? Are you an ISA new in your role, or what's your field right now?
Yeah, so. I think I remember he's new.
Okay.
All right. So, and again, don't forget about your third-party vendors.
Yay! ISA after
make sure we connect.
Okay. You hear that, Mehmet? So comment, or if you haven't connected with Peggy, which I'm sure everyone's connected.
We're connected on LinkedIn, but he needs to make sure that we meet each other in Dublin.
Yes. Tiffany, hi at Peggy Nolan. How can I work under you? I want to get the hands-on experience. Aw.
Oh, thanks.
That is so encouraging.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, right now we are a 2-person consulting firm. It's myself and Lisa Cressy. We were the tag team at our former company. We started our own company. We have a strong suspicion that you did not hear me say this, and if Lisa hears me say this, she might shoot me. There may be opportunities in the future. Nothing is certain yet, but there could be. And to be honest with you, I'll be pulling people from my resource center first. Because I know that they're learning from me. So,
which I will throw that the resource center in the comments right now. So feel free to take a look at that at your leisure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mehmet said we are all connected.
Yeah, we're all connected.
We're all here, so yeah.
We're all connected. I actually, in my last module of the last class that I just dropped into the resource center today, for logging, the last section is called "It's All Connected."
Oh, that's funny.
It's all connected. All right. So one of the things I do in the course on scope is I give examples and I walk you through scope examples on what would you pick. Or what would you say is in scope? What would you reasonably say is out of scope? And what sort of questions would you ask to dig a little deeper? So we do go through that in the course itself. All right. So there's some things that now we're going to move on to step number 4, which is creating formal processes for managing scope. So in order to do anything, you need to have a process for it, right? Especially if you want it to become repeatable and automatable. So, I'm going to go over both things in DSS 321 and the new verbiage in version 4. So, PCI DSS version 321, which is requirement 2.4, and version 4, requirement 12.5. So 2.4 is the new 12.5.1 that completely took it out of requirement 2 and moved it into requirement 12. Organizations must maintain a list of hardware and software that are in use, and that list must include a description and function of function or the use. So that is hardware and software only. Right? This is we're just scratching the surface on what you need to do. What's new in version 4 is requirement 12.5.2, and I am reading because I don't make this up. This is straight from the DSS. PCI DSS scope is documented and confirmed by the entity at least once every 12 months and upon significant change to the in-scope environment. When I said that last year at the community meeting up on stage, and I just looked out in the audience and I said, you know what, this is a great start, but you didn't go far enough, because every 12 months for a large organization, or just take a grocery store chain, wherever you live, you've got a major grocery store chain. They're not going to maintain scope every 12 months. They're not going to look at scope just every 12 months or upon significant change. They're going to be constantly looking at their scope because other requirements depend on it. Now, in the PCI DSS version 3.2.1 reporting template, section 4.4. So we're talking about the template that the QSAs use. If you do not have this downloaded, do it now. This is going to save your butts as an ISA. You need to know exactly what the QSA has to do. If you don't, you're always going to be stuck behind the 8 ball.
What is that again, Peggy?
I'm reporting template.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna get a link for it, everyone, so that you can go download it from the PCI Council's website. Yeah,
this will save your butts. Trust me, it saved ours back in 2012. All right, section 4.4 of the executive summary, you must include the list of critical hardware and software. In this list, it has to have the type of device, the vendor, the make, model, name of the software product, version or release, and the role and functionality. In version 4, reporting template, section 4.8, you must include type of system component, total number of system components of that same type, the vendor, the product name and version, role and function. So if you have 100 Windows servers, okay, you have to log this all in. All right. You must create and maintain. This is a must for me. Now, if I was running somebody else's compliance program, I'd say we have to do this. Period. No questions asked. Create and maintain the inventory of all your people, processes, and technologies that are in scope for PCI DSS assessment. Now, originally, this is all going to start in an Excel spreadsheet, not in 7. You're going to create a workbook. All right. We're going to talk about automating that later.
Okay.
Per PCI DSS version 3.2.1, requirement 2.4 and requirement 12.5.1, you must maintain that list of hardware and software. In 12.5.2, again, you have to have your scope documented. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about this. And the fact that this has to be stated really kind of blows my mind. How do you do anything else without a documented scope? How do you assess?
Yeah.
How do you assign tasks? How do you know which servers to log? To have logging on? How do you know which servers need to be scanned for configuration drift?
And again, everyone, this is not for you to initiate, or maybe not initiate, to program specifically. You're not the one who needs to make these things happen and document them, but you need to be the one to put the fire under the right people's bottoms to get this.
That's not always going to happen, Jaime.
Really? But
really?
But
Lisa and I did scope.
Oh my goodness.
Lisa and I did
even
scope.
In the document, I'm saying in the documentation, like you had to. Oh.
We did it all. We did this from soup to nuts because we, some people are more helpful than others. Now, we didn't take care of the network diagrams. The application teams did the cardholder data flows. The network team did the network diagrams. But when it came to documenting scope, all of our processes, all of our technologies, I was handed 6 different spreadsheets when I started it as an ISA. And the first question I asked was, which one is accurate? And the response I got was all of them. And I said, that's impossible.
Oh, yeah. I guess my thought is, because a lot of times when this type of information is shared, I know people in circles who feel like you kind of like earlier, you're like the person who was like, we can't do that. We can't do that. People who hear this, sometimes they start feeling like this. I didn't know that this was going to have to be us or whatever. Right. And I always think it's good if we can help them understand the work that they're going to be doing versus what they think they're going to be doing. Right.
If all you're thinking is that you're collecting evidence, you're wrong. You're doing a lot of work. We lived and breathed and ate this 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. We very rarely had downtime. And when we had downtime, we were improving processes.
I know it sounds weird, but that just sounds like my jam, Peggy.
Well, for 10 years, obviously, it was my jam and it was Lisa's jam.
Like I had a job where I was leading a team here in town, and we had to go through the whole department, the whole building, the whole company was going through basically it was a version of how can we be more efficient. And so every department had to go through it. I was one of the ones who was like, well, I want to go first. I have a habit of doing something like that, stuff like that, because I'm like, I want to be ahead of the curve versus being told what I'm going to have to do. I want to have a say in it.
When we went agile at our former company, we kind of looked at each other. And at first I thought, this is oil and water. This is compliance. This isn't software development. And I said, oh, hell, let's go first. We're going to make PCI agile.
Yeah. See,
all right.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. It all starts with scope. Absolutely 100%.
That's requirement 0.
It's requirement 0. And it's not requirement 12.5.2. If you're doing it then, sorry, you lost.
You waited too long.
You waited way too long if you're going in sequential order. The thing about scope and why did we own scope? No, because it wasn't our application. It wasn't our network. So there were teams that owned it, but I had to get them into a room and I had to beg, borrow, and pull teeth to get what I needed to be able to do a first iteration of this years ago. Once you have the first iteration, if this is the first time that you're doing a massive end-to-end scope assessment, it's going to take you a while, right?
Right.
In my report on compliance planner, I'm like, 30 days prior to your kickoff, you need to do a scope assessment. However, if you've never done one, probably 6 months before you kick off, you need to do one. This could take you a while, depending on the complexity of your organization and how many cardholder data flows do you have. Say you're a grocery store chain. You're going to have a lot of flows. And a lot of different
merchant
networks.
IDs impact that too? Like if you have multiple merchant IDs?
No, we had multiple merchant IDs, but they all funneled into one billing application.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So the more information that you maintain on your in-scope assets, the easier it is to maintain scope. So for example, we recommend that you have the prod date. So when the asset went into production, when the process went into production, when, whatever. You want the asset name, you want the IP address, you want the technology, the OS version. You want to make sure you have documented the technology subject matter expert. So the system administrator who's in charge of that, who's going to be your point of contact for, say, I don't know, Splunk. You want to have, they're in charge. You want the location of the asset. Where is it? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Where is it? What are you doing with it? Because you have to because assets come in and out of scope, assets come into prod and eventually the end of life and they decommission, you want a decommission date. You want any other specific asset tags that your organization uses. So you may have other things. And of course, the big flag that you want to make sure that you have in an automated system is this asset in scope for PCI?
Right.
Not that hard. It's a flag. It's a yes or a no. It's a 1 or a 0. And if it's a yes, it's going to trigger off a whole cascade of things that need to happen to that particular asset.
How odd. Have you had have there been times where where the argument against you is, it's not in scope. It's not in scope. It's not in scope.
I used to have that all the time. I would get why are my routers in scope? And I said, I don't know. Why don't you talk to your senior director who put them in scope in this year?
Okay.
And then once it's in scope, the only way we allowed people to take it out of scope was through a pen test. So they would get on the annual or the semi-annual pen test cycle and have it as a use case to be pen tested, whether it was, our own internal pen testing team, or before that, we had a vendor do it. But they just had to get on the use case.
I like that. I like that. I appreciate you sharing
because then they could legitimately say, because at one point we brought all of the routers into scope because you know why? There was a good reason behind it. They all got funding to get upgraded.
Okay.
But then to take them out of scope, except all but, 8 of them, they had to pen test to prove because they were in scope. And now suddenly you're just going to take, say just for giggles, it was 30. There was a lot more because they did that to get the funding to upgrade them. Gotcha. Okay. It's a little method to the madness, but then there was extra work on the back end to kick them out. So step 5 is automate your formal processes. Remember, if it's repeatable, it can be automated. And there's a lot of technology tools out there that come with a baseline reporting structure or some type of automation where you can, write SQL queries and pull the data that you need out of that system. But you want to automate your processes to keep the physical asset inventory as accurately as humanly possible. And now this is very specific to your servers and your firewalls, your routers, your appliances, your whatever. You want that list as accurate as possible because there are other requirements that are depending on an accurate asset inventory. Your vulnerability management team is depending on that. Your logging team is depending on that. They need to know what servers the logging agents need to go on. And yes, that's part of the hardening. So your entire, the whatever your build team is, they need to understand what the scope is for your asset inventory so that they're building PCI servers correctly and they're getting hardened to the configuration standards. And not only that, but most of these, we had our configuration scans done weekly. So we cross-checked our asset inventory on a weekly basis so that it was always as up-to-date as possible before the scans would run, right? Because we want the scans to run on all our prod servers. For PCI. And then step 6 is to continuously validate your scope. So this is future proofing for version 4. And then you want to make sure that the processes that you have for managing scope have periodic validation checkpoints. Again, 12.5.2 in version 4 only requires you to do it once every 12 months or upon significant change. Well, depending on your definition of significant change, you could be validating scope a lot. All right, so here's what I recommend for weekly. Weekly is your physical assets. That's the hardware and software that's used in the cardholder data environment, and these change regularly. Hardware assets get upgraded, decommissioned, or added to the production environment, and we highly recommend a weekly reconciliation of the physical assets. Monthly, you need to scan and hunt for unsupervised credit card data. There's well-meaning people who are going to think that putting credit card numbers with name and other personal information and put it in a spreadsheet, put it out on SharePoint, they think that they're becoming more efficient at their job because now they don't have to look up that customer's credit card number again when the next time they talk to them. But it's unsupervised. So they either have to stop doing that or bring their process into scope, right? Right. Quarterly, you want to check quarterly your cardholder data flows and your payment processes. Those change. And with the speed of how digital payments are being new ways to make payments, I mean, all you have to do is go out and read MasterCard's blog or Visa's blog and how fast that things are changing.
And new technologies are trying to create to.
Yeah. And whatever the application developers at the time, they like to just create stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, let's do this. Let's do that. Well, you need to have a quarterly check on your cardholder data flows and your payment processes. You probably also want to do a quarterly check on your network diagrams, because if your cardholder data flows change, the network diagram might have to change.
I'll be right back, Peggy. My dehumidifier just turned on for some reason.
I can't hear it.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind.
Can't hear it.
Okay.
Quarterly, you also want to check in with your technologies. So while security technologies may not change frequently, upgrades to them will. So these upgrades will need to be updated in your inventory. Remember, there's certain things that you have to track in your inventory list. Semi-annual, you want to check in with your people at least every 6 months. So this could be, there are a variety of ways to, depending on what your organization does. It could be just by confirming department codes, who's in those department codes, confirming your subject matter experts. I would assign a task, oh my gosh, and then I would get an email back saying, I don't do this anymore. And I said, well, who does? Did you transition your role? When were you going to tell me?
And that's what I was about to say. All that stuff needs to be communicated. Like those,
it needs to be communicated. You need to check in. You need to double check at least twice a year. Who is the new control owner? Because people change. They change roles within the company. They leave, or they just quit. They say bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You need to check in with your vendors. You have to track them anyways for 12.8. So there's things that you want to double check twice a year. And it just depends on your environment. You may want to check this more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But never once a year.
Make sure that you guys go back, not just listen to this again, record these last few points that Peggy's been making, because the checks, like that's stuff that is super helpful. Remember, I talked earlier about timing, like understanding what the time frame was. Peggy has just
this is all in the course that I teach on Scope, all of it. And you can get it either by subscribing to the Resource Center, or you can download the course out of our digital download shop. We have this as a standalone class. It is so important that you get Scope right, period. Now, the full Scope review, I recommend it's a semi-annual thing. You have to do a full Scope review. And again, I always recommend 30 days before a report on compliance. But if this is your first one, you may need more time. And don't shortchange your time on how much pre-work you need to do before the engagement with the QSA is in full force. Right? They're your consultant. They come on board as a contractor. We had an annual statement of work that always had this block of time that was non-assessment work. Okay. So we accounted for this time because having the QSA do a full-blown walkthrough with us was in their best interest and ours. It was like, you got the shakedown.
Yeah.
Before you kick off your report on compliance, because the last thing you want to do is come up short on Scope.
How did that work out for you? I don't remember time frame. So, during the pandemic, there was a lot of work that was, made virtual, and I'm sure I've heard that the QSAs had to have a restructure on how that was allowed, and so there's some, are there still enough staggering where there's QSAs who are virtually doing their walkthroughs and stuff?
So let me put it this way. Even before COVID, we did a lot of things on meetings, on Teams, meaning they were doing walkthroughs, they were doing interviews. It was all through Teams.
Okay.
I didn't need to have them on site for that stuff. What, on site to do a conference call with somebody that, that works 6,000 miles away? Why? Just sit in your office in Philadelphia. I'll sit in mine in New Hampshire. Do they need to be on site to do like a physical walkthrough of a data center? Absolutely. I don't need to be there with them, although I never went on a walkthrough of their physical environment with them. I handed them off to the physical security guys and said, have fun. See you in 2 hours.
Okay. All right.
But there is, I would plan with my QSA because there were like, they had to like hit a certain amount of hours to be on site. And the thing is that the work they went, I would try and tee them up for assessment stuff, but it generally didn't work that way.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. They had to be on site for, the data center and call center stuff, but I was sending them to different parts of the country.
Because the data centers and stuff were not in the same location as you.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And we tried to like mirror them up, so they would have to also do a call center assessment, physical. So, and they would pick a call center that was, we had 3 data centers. So they would pick a call center that was in close proximity
of one of the data centers. Gotcha.
And that
all about consolidating that as best you can.
Yeah. But during COVID, we got 1 data center walkthrough done before everybody was sent home. And then the rest of it was, we're going to do this as a live stream. The security guy is going to walk through the data center and video live.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then nobody was at work, so they couldn't, look at somebody's desktop because everybody was sent home, even our call center agents. So everybody was working from home. We had, we just rolled with it.
Yeah.
So now, depending on your organization, like I said, physical assets at least once a week. You have monthly check-ins that you want to do with different things. You have quarterly checks that you want to do. You have semi-annual checks. There, to me, in my mind, there is no annual check on scope. And if you follow the periodic time schedule that we've identified, you're going to hit the significant change as well.
There you go, folks. So there's someone who has already done a lot of the work that you're looking at, or if you're needing to kind of, see a peer in what they're doing and see if it can help you improve your process. You've just heard it from them right now. Peggy has shared a great amount of information that could be very helpful for you if you're an ISA or you're the professional on site working for your company's PCI compliance.
And there's even more in the resource center because there's a whole guidebook that goes with this. And then we have all the different types of checklists that you can download. If all you want to do is figure out which networks are in scope and out of scope, we have one checklist for that. You can just download that checklist and do that.
Yes.
But there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of when it comes to scope.
But you know what? Try not to get so inundated with the information. Just like a check, like just check it off. Like just be like, okay, scope,
and just remember, if you are doing this is your job. You do it in bite-sized pieces, and that's why we've broken it down into these 6 steps. They're bite-sized steps because when you look at scope, it's like trying to eat the elephant all at once. When you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So you start with, what do you start with first? What stores, processes, and transmits?
Mm-hmm. That's the giveaway right there. That's the easy step 1.
That's where you start.
Yep.
Well, actually, you start with, did we reduce scope anywhere? Do we have network segmentation in play? You start there, but really follow the money, and an accurate scope makes for an easier assessment.
Awesome. Peggy, I am so appreciative of everything you taught tonight, and a lot of it just reverberated. It was very good to follow and understand. And man, I hope all of you out there are just as encouraged as I am, and that you flagged the video because there was just so much good information here as it relates to scope, right? Peggy shared her valuable resource and information with us. Make sure that you go find her on LinkedIn and connect with her and myself too. Go check out her website and what she's talking about. I put the link in the comments, so if you saw it, then you can click on it. once you find Peggy or myself, you'll see the website and you can totally just get to it from there also. But it is a good resource center. It is a good resource center. I do appreciate a lot of the information that's in there. One of the things that I always walk away from it is like, there's no need to recreate the wheel. It's already there for you.
No, it's already there for you. We've done the work for you. And we don't want to see people go through the angst and the anxiety that we went through to get PCI running continuously at a level 1 merchant. In the last couple of years that we worked there, I mean, we stood up sustainability in 2013, and man, we had it running like a champ.
Nice.
Before we both left.
And that's what what I want to get to eventually, is get to the spot where I can introduce that to the organization and be able to not just sell it, but, implement it also.
You have no choice. They have no choice. They have to get there.
And
requirements
if they feel like they do,
they're
going to find out a hard way that they don't have that choice, or an expensive.
They don't have that choice. So they have to be continuously compliant. They sign on a dotted line that makes them legally obligated to maintain PCI compliance day in and day out. Sorry.
Yes. So remember that, everyone. Remember that, okay? So before we go, I want to give you, Peggy, an opportunity to kind of share whatever you want to share. I know I gave you the screen earlier, but that's okay.
Yeah, you did.
I want you to be able to just share whatever you want. And while she's doing that, everyone, I'm going to paste the PCI Council's it's not the North American
template, the reporting template link.
Well, I already shared that, but the speaking, the Dublin meet.
Yeah, Dublin. Yeah.
So I'm going to put that in the comments while you're talking, Peggy, okay?
Cool.
And there you go.
All right, everybody. I just want to let you know that we dropped, I think it's our 10th course. It's either the 9th one or the 10th one. It is log management for PCI DSS compliance. It is an overview of the key sub requirements 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, and 10.7. 10.7 has a brand new requirement that ticks and ties to your incident response plan. But we cover quite a bit of information in this particular workshop. Hugely beneficial, especially because log management is one of the most notorious requirements that organizations struggle with maintaining continuous compliance with. So hopefully we break it down for everybody in bite-sized pieces. Again, we want consumable. We want you to understand the fundamental reasons why we do log management and audit logging itself. So be sure to check out the Resource Center. Now's a great time to subscribe because we are changing things up very soon, like the end of September. Monthly subscriptions are going to go to an annual subscription because of the content that we have in there. And the reason why we started with the monthly subscriptions, it was to get everybody's feet wet because we were building out the content. But our content library has grown faster than we expected it to grow. And we continue to add more content out there to help you with PCI DSS compliance, especially maintaining continuous PCI DSS compliance. And in October, we'll be looking for a live 5 to 6 hour workshop on PCI fundamentals. So it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 6 hours, maybe longer depending on questions and answers. And we'll probably break it up over the course of 2 different days. But be looking for that. Until I see you next time, have a great week.
Awesome. That's so awesome. I can't wait, Peggy. Let me either be the first to sign up or help you out somehow, whichever, both ways are okay with me. But just a couple comments here as we leave out. Tiffany says, thank you guys. She's agreeing with whatever you had said. Michael says, thank you, Peggy. Always insightful sessions. Thank you, Jaime, for bringing video.
Thanks, Michael.
You're very welcome. Corey says, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Corey.
Really appreciate you guys. If you all have ideas, let us know. But Peggy, I'm going to say good night. I'm going to put you in the green room, and then I'll touch base with you right after the show's over, okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Peggy. We appreciate you coming on tonight. Oh, sorry. My bad. So everyone, thank you for coming on tonight and watching. I hope that you were as encouraged and I can't think of the word I want to use, but that you gained as much knowledge as I did tonight, because it was very, very, very insightful here. There's a lot of pieces here. Not only did Peggy provide us a lot of the information on scoping, but there was some real nuggets in there that can really help you out if you're understanding the right things. Like, I know there's a lot of people who are looking for positions out there in this realm. And if you listen to a lot of the stuff in between the nugget or the points that Peggy was making tonight, you can pick up some good stuff that'll help you out in your job searching and in your just edifying your PCI knowledge and being able to sell yourself out there. So listen up. We're going to be back next Wednesday at 4:30. If you have ideas for videos or content that you want to hear from specifically in the PCI realm or cybersecurity in general, let me know and we'll get it on. I am working. I will let you know. I was interested in understanding about cybersecurity insurance. If you don't know what that is, well, I'm not going to tell you right now, but I started talks with someone who I want to bring on to talk about cybersecurity insurance, because I thought I wanted to know more. Well, then if I'm going to learn more, I just want to share that with everyone else here also. So be on the lookout for that. But if you have ideas for a future video where you want to hear someone talking about a specific aspect of cybersecurity and PCI, let us know. I can talk with Peggy and she can bring it up. And or if we just want somewhere else where, it's a different perspective, we can do that too. But listen, the goal here is I want to educate you. I want to be educated and I want to share this with you. I don't want to just consume content, but I want to create content and share with the community. I know that I would appreciate someone, and I have appreciated people who've done that for me, and I just want to give back to you guys. So I hope you like what's going on here, and if you have some questions or ideas, please share with me. Please let me know. I'm always looking for people to come on and not just talk about PCI learning, but also people who have victories, who have had successes for whatever, maybe they got the job after learning PCI and they just want to encourage others. So if that's you, let me know and we can set some time up for you to come on. Okay. Otherwise, everyone, you have a great night and we will see you next week at the same time. Bye.